He still remembers the way her hand felt that night. Not soft, not cold, just still. The hospital lights were too bright. Someone had lowered the blinds, but it didn't matter. The room felt exposed anyway. Machines hummed like they were bored. He stood there with both hands on the railing of the bed, knuckles white, as if pressure alone could hold her here. Across town, in an office with glass walls and a city view no one was looking at, she sat in her car long after the engine stopped. The voicemail had already ended. She replayed it anyway, over and over. Her husband's voice, tight, apologizing for working late again. She didn't know yet that it would be the last time she heard him. Neither of them cried at first. That came later, much later. The mornings were the worst, not because they hurt more, but because they asked the same thing from him every day. Get up. Move. Pretend the world was still built for 3 people. He woke before the alarm now. Not out of discipline. Out of habit that had nowhere to go. His eyes would open, and his body would already be tense, like it had been holding its breath all night. The house was quiet in a way it never used to be. Not peaceful. Just empty. He lay still for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, listening. There was no sound from the other side of the bed, no shifting, no sigh, no annoyed little cough the way she used to do when he moved too much. That absence felt like a second person in the room. He sat up slowly. The mattress didn't dip on her side anymore. It held its shape too well. It looked wrong, like the bed was waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. He stood, went to the bathroom, and turned the faucet on. The water was cold at first. He splashed his face and looked up. His reflection didn't look older. It looked unfinished, like something had been interrupted mid-sentence. He brushed his teeth. Shaved. Not because he cared. Because his son was watching everything now, even when he pretended he wasn't. Downstairs, he moved through the kitchen without thinking. Coffee first, then toast, then the lunchbox. The fridge was covered with drawings. Some of them were old, some were new. Crayon stick figures, a sun in the corner, a house with too many windows. His son's handwriting was getting clearer, which should have been a good thing, but it made him feel strange, like time was moving too fast in the one place it wasn't supposed to. He packed grapes, a sandwich, a small bag of chips. His hand paused over the snack drawer. There were still things in there she had bought. Little treats she'd picked out because she knew their son liked them. He didn't throw them away. He couldn't. He just rotated around them as if avoiding them would keep them from expiring. He heard footsteps on the stairs, small, slow, dragging. His son appeared in the doorway wearing the same pajama shirt he'd worn 2 nights ago. Hair sticking up in one spot, eyes half open. "Morning," he said, forcing the word out gently. His son didn't answer right away. He walked to the kitchen table and climbed onto the chair, pulling his knees up. He stared at the lunchbox like it was suspicious. "You want cereal?" the man asked. A shrug. He poured it anyway. The milk splashed too loudly into the bowl. His son watched him. Kids didn't stare like adults. Adults looked away out of politeness. Kids just looked until they understood what they were seeing. He placed the bowl down and sat across from him. For a moment, the only sound was chewing. Then his son said, "Did you dream about Mom?" The question was quiet, casual, like asking about the weather. His spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. He didn't answer immediately. He wasn't calculating. He wasn't trying to be careful. He just didn't know what to do with the question. "Yes," he finally said. His son nodded, satisfied. What was she doing? He swallowed. His throat felt tight, like it had been waiting for this exact conversation. "She was in the kitchen," he said. The lie was soft, almost kind. "Making pancakes." His son smiled a little. Not fully, just enough to show that the image made sense. "She makes the good ones," his son said. He nodded once. He couldn't trust his voice. The pancakes weren't the point. The point was that his son wanted her to still be somewhere he could reach. Somewhere ordinary, somewhere safe. After breakfast, He helped him get dressed. Socks first, then shoes. His son's backpack was already by the door. That part was new. His son used to forget it every morning, used to run back upstairs in a panic, yelling her name, asking where it was, while she laughed and told him it was exactly where he left it. Now he never forgot. The man noticed that, and it bothered him more than it should have. They drove to school in silence. The radio stayed off. He used to keep it on low. Some music. Something to fill the space. Now the space felt like the only honest thing in the car. At a red light, his son looked out the window and said, "Mrs. Patel said we can bring pictures next week." He kept his eyes on the road. Pictures of what? Our families. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't look at his son, but he could feel him waiting. He made himself breathe. "Okay," he said, "we can find one." His son nodded again, calm, like he'd expected that answer. But the man already knew the problem. There were plenty of pictures. Too many. Pictures before the hospital, before the phone call, before the funeral. Pictures where she was alive and smiling, holding their son on her hip, cheeks flushed from summer heat, hair messy from wind. Pictures where she looked so normal it almost made him angry. Because if she could look that normal, then why had she left? The school parking lot was full. Parents getting out, closing doors, walking fast. A man in a suit, a woman with a coffee cup. Someone laughing loudly, someone yelling at their kid to hurry. He parked and turned off the engine. His son unbuckled himself. Then he paused, hand on the door handle. "Dad? Yeah?" His son looked at him. His face was serious in a way it shouldn't have been at that age. "If I forget her face, will she be mad?" The man felt something move in his chest. Not pain, exactly. Something sharper. He leaned forward slightly, trying to keep his voice even. "No," he said, "she won't be mad." His son's eyes stayed on him. "How do you know?" He wanted to say he didn't. He wanted to say he was terrified of the same thing, that some mornings he couldn't picture her clearly until he forced himself to look at a photo. But he didn't say that. He reached over and put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Because she loved you," he said. "That doesn't change." His son stared at his lap for a moment, then nodded. He opened the door and got out. The man watched him walk toward the building, small body swallowed by the crowd, backpack bouncing slightly. He waited until his son disappeared inside before starting the car again. He sat there with both hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. He didn't cry. He just sat until his chest stopped shaking. He didn't go straight to work. He told himself he would. He even drove in that direction at first, taking the familiar streets out of habit. But somewhere near the second intersection, he changed lanes without thinking and turned the other way. The cemetery was quiet this time of morning. The gates were open, but there was no one at the booth. No cars except his. The gravel under his tires made a dry, crunching sound that felt too loud. He parked and sat for a moment with his hand still on the steering wheel. His breathing was shallow, like his body had learned not to take up space. When he finally stepped out, the air hit him with a cold edge. It wasn't freezing, but it had that early day bite that made his skin tighten. He walked slowly, passing rows of stones, some new, some worn down, some decorated with fresh flowers, others bare and forgotten. He knew where she was without looking. His feet took him there like they had their own memory. The grave was clean. He kept it that way, not because anyone asked him to, but because the thought of weeds growing there made something inside him twist. Her name was carved neatly. Her dates, a small line underneath that, felt like an insult. Beloved wife and mother. As if that was the whole thing. As if her life could be reduced to a sentence someone else chose. He crouched down, resting one hand on his knee. His other hand hovered over the stone but didn't touch it right away. He didn't like touching it. It felt like agreeing. After a moment, his fingers pressed against the cold surface anyway. He stared at her name for a long time. There were things he could have said, things he should have said, but the words never came out right. They always sounded childish in his head, too raw, too needy. So he stayed quiet. The wind moved through the trees behind him. Leaves shifted. Something clicked softly against another branch. He swallowed. I lied to him again, he said finally. His voice sounded strange in the open air, too small. He asked if you were mad, he continued, about forgetting your face. His throat tightened. He cleared it and kept going. I told him no. I told him you wouldn't be mad, like I know what you'd feel, like I know anything. His hand pressed harder against the stone, almost rough. I don't know what you'd feel, he said, quieter. I don't even know what you felt at the end. That was the part he couldn't stop circling. Not the sickness, not the hospital, not the doctors, the look in her eyes. The last day she was awake enough to really see him, she'd looked tired. But there was something else there too. Like she was leaving him with something unfinished. He'd asked her if she was scared. She hadn't answered. She'd just stared at him, breathing shallowly, her fingers twitching like she was trying to hold on to something but didn't have the strength. That image stayed lodged in him. He hated it. He stood up slowly. His knees ached. He hadn't realized he'd been crouched so long. He took a step back from the grave, then another. He didn't say goodbye. He never did. It felt stupid. She wasn't there to hear it. Still, as he turned to leave, his mouth moved on its own. I'm trying, he said. Then he walked away before his voice could break. Work was noise. Emails, calls, meetings, people speaking in full sentences about things that didn't matter. The kind of conversations that used to be normal. Now they felt like a performance he didn't remember auditioning for. His coworkers didn't mention her name anymore. They used to, at first. They'd said they were sorry, their faces pinched with awkward sincerity. Some had brought food. Some had offered to help with anything, which always meant nothing. After a few months, they stopped. They adjusted. He hadn't. His boss asked him if he could stay late that afternoon. He said yes before he even thought about it. It was automatic. Easier than going home too early. Easier than sitting in the house while the clock moved slowly toward bedtime. By the time he picked his son up from after-school care, the building was almost empty. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly in the hallway. A woman at the desk smiled at him like she felt sorry for him. He hated that smile more than he hated the silence. His son ran to him anyway, full speed, arms open. That part still happened. Every day. The man bent down and caught him, holding him close. His son smelled like crayons and dust and cheap hand soap. Dad, guess what? His son said immediately. What? We played soccer. He nodded. Yeah? And I scored. His son's voice was proud, bright, like the world wasn't broken. He smiled. That's great. His son pulled back and looked at him. Why are you sad? The question hit him without warning. He blinked. I'm not sad. His son frowned slightly, not convinced. He adjusted his grip on the backpack and started walking them out of the building. I'm just tired, he said. His son accepted that answer the way kids sometimes did, half believing, half storing it away for later. In the car, his son talked the whole ride home. About school, about a kid who got in trouble, about a teacher who smelled like mint gum, about a bird he saw on the playground that had one leg. The man listened, nodding at the right times, answering when he needed to, but his mind kept slipping, not to memories exactly, to the shape of his life now. Everything had become smaller, more careful. Dinner, homework, bath, bed, bed. Every night, the same routine. Like if he followed it perfectly, nothing else would fall apart. At home, he made pasta because it was easy. His son sat at the counter swinging his legs while he stirred the pot. The kitchen used to feel alive when she was there. She used to hum while cooking. Sometimes she'd dance in small steps when she thought no one was watching. Now, the kitchen was just a room. His son ate quickly, asked for dessert, complained about brushing his teeth. Normal, then bedtime. His son insisted on 2 stories now instead of 1. He didn't ask for his mother anymore. Not directly. He just asked for more, like he was trying to fill the space without naming it. When his son finally fell asleep, The man stayed in the doorway longer than necessary. The child's face looked peaceful. Too peaceful. The man watched his chest rise and fall, and something inside him loosened a little. He closed the door softly and walked downstairs. He cleaned the kitchen even though it was already clean. He wiped the counters, put the dishes away, reorganized a drawer that didn't need reorganizing. When there was nothing left to do, he stood in the middle of the living room and didn't know where to put himself. The TV remote sat on the table. He didn't touch it. Instead, he walked to the hallway closet. He hadn't opened it in a while. He pulled the door open and stared at the coats hanging there. Her coat was still there. Gray wool, buttons missing on one sleeve because she'd always meant to sew them back on but never did. He reached out and touched the fabric. His fingers froze for a moment, as if the texture alone could bring her back into the room. He took it off the hanger slowly. The coat was heavier than he remembered. He held it against his chest, breathing in. There was no scent left. Not really. Just faint detergent and old air. That made his stomach drop. He lowered it, staring at it like it had betrayed him. He should have donated it. People told him that. They said it would help. They said it was part of moving forward. He hated that phrase. Moving forward implied he was leaving her behind on purpose. He hung the coat back up carefully, smoothing the shoulders like he was fixing her posture. Then he shut the closet door and leaned his forehead against it. His eyes closed. He stood like that for a long time. When he finally stepped away, his face was dry, but his throat burned. Across the city, she was still in her office. It was past midnight, and the building had emptied out hours ago. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The lights on her floor were dimmed automatically, leaving her desk lit by a single lamp. The city outside her window looked clean from up here. Neat, controlled, the way she liked things. Her computer screen glowed with numbers and charts, quarterly reports, acquisition projections, an email thread with the board. She read the same paragraph 3 times and still didn't absorb it. Her eyes drifted to the corner of her desk where a framed photograph sat. She hadn't moved it. She also hadn't looked at it directly in weeks. Tonight she did. Her husband was smiling in it, his arm around her waist, his hair slightly messy, his tie loosened like he'd been pulled into the photo without warning. She remembered that day. He'd complained about the sun in his eyes. She'd told him to stop acting like a child. He'd laughed. Now she stared at the picture like it was something stolen. Her fingers touched the edge of the frame. Not lovingly, just cautiously, like she didn't trust herself. Her phone buzzed. Another message from the CFO. A question about tomorrow's meeting. She typed the response quickly, short and sharp, then tossed the phone onto the desk. Her chest felt tight. She rolled her shoulders back, trying to shake it off. She didn't. She stood up and walked to the office bathroom. The lights came on automatically. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was composed, hair pinned neatly, makeup still intact. She looked like someone who had everything under control. That was the problem. No one asked her how she was anymore. Not really. People asked if she needed anything. People asked if she wanted time off. People told her she was handling it well. Handling it well meant she wasn't inconvenient. She turned on the faucet and ran cold water over her hands. She watched it drip from her fingers into the sink. For a moment she imagined calling someone. Not her assistant, not a colleague, someone who wouldn't ask about stock prices or reputation, someone who might understand the quiet way grief sat in the body. She didn't have anyone like that. She dried her hands, turned off the light, and went back to her office. She sat down again, stared at the screen, and for the first time in weeks, she let her head drop forward until her forehead rested against the desk. Not dramatically, just as if her body finally admitted it was tired. Her breath came out slow, then another. She stayed like that until her phone buzzed again. A calendar reminder. Support group. Tomorrow night. She didn't delete it. She didn't confirm it either. She just stared at the notification until the screen dimmed and went dark. She almost didn't go. The reminder stayed on her phone all day. A small block of time between a strategy call and a dinner she had already canceled twice. She moved meetings around it without thinking too hard about why. At 6:40, She was still in the office. At 6:52, she closed her laptop. She told her assistant she had a personal commitment. The assistant didn't ask what that meant. No one ever did. The building elevator was nearly empty. Her reflection in the metal doors looked sharper under fluorescent light. Controlled. The same expression she wore in boardrooms. She kept it on. The support group met in the basement of a community church 10 blocks away. Not the kind with stained glass and dramatic ceilings. Just folding chairs and a coffee machine that hissed too loudly. She stood outside for a moment before going in. People were already seated in a loose circle. Some she recognized from previous weeks. Most kept their eyes low. She chose a chair near the edge. Not too close. Not too far. He was already there. She noticed him before she meant to. He sat slightly hunched forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped. He wore a dark sweater that looked worn at the cuffs. His hair was shorter than last week. Or maybe she had just looked longer this time. He didn't see her right away. The facilitator began speaking, a calm voice, measured, asking if anyone wanted to share. A woman across the circle talked about clearing out her husband's closet. She said the word closet 3 times like it was heavier than the rest of the sentence. No one interrupted her. When she finished, the room went still. The facilitator looked around. He cleared his throat. She felt it before she heard it. That slight shift in air when someone decides to speak. "I kept her coat," he said. His voice was steady, but not flat. "Just careful. I know it doesn't make sense. It's been a while." He paused. His jaw tightened for a second before he continued. "It still hangs in the hallway." He didn't look at anyone while he talked. "I told myself I'd donate it, that it was practical." A small breath left him, almost a laugh, but not quite. "But every time I reach for it, I can't." Silence again. No one rushed to fill it. He rubbed his thumb against his palm absently, like he was feeling fabric that wasn't there. "My son doesn't ask about it," he added. "I don't know if that's better." The facilitator nodded gently. "What do you feel when you see it?" He didn't answer right away. She watched his shoulders rise, then settle. "Like I'm erasing something if I let it go," he said finally. The words landed somewhere inside her. She looked down at her own hands. Her husband's watch was in her desk drawer. She had taken it off his wrist herself in the hospital. The nurse had asked if she wanted to keep it. She had said yes without thinking. It still smelled faintly like metal and hospital air. She hadn't told anyone that. The facilitator turned to the group. "Does anyone relate?" She didn't plan to speak. She never did. But her hand lifted slightly before she could stop it. All eyes turned. Her throat felt tight. "I kept his voicemail," she said. Her voice sounded different in this room. Softer. Less certain. "I don't listen to it often." She paused. "That wasn't entirely true. But I won't delete it." She kept her gaze fixed on the floor. "It's proof," she added, "that he was real." The sentence felt exposed once it was out. She could feel the room holding it. When she finally looked up, his eyes were on her, not in a way that demanded anything, just there, recognizing something. The facilitator said something gentle about memory and attachment, about how objects become anchors. She barely heard it. Her pulse felt louder than the voice in the room. The meeting moved on. Other people spoke. Stories overlapped in quiet ways. Hospital rooms, accidents, sudden phone calls, the strange cruelty of normal days continuing after everything had split open. When it ended, chairs scraped softly against the floor. People left in small clusters. She stood slowly, slipping her coat on. He moved toward the coffee table, picking up a paper cup he hadn't finished. They almost reached the exit at the same time. There was a brief, awkward pause as they both stepped aside. "You go," he said. His voice was low. She shook her head once. "It's fine." They walked out together anyway. The air outside was cool. Night had settled fully. Streetlights cast thin yellow circles on the pavement. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "The voicemail." She glanced at him. He looked uncertain now, like he regretted starting the sentence. I get that, he finished simply. She nodded once. The coat, she replied. A small silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. I thought I was the only one doing that, he said after a second. She almost smiled. You're not, she said. They reached the corner where their paths would split. He shifted his weight slightly. I'm. He stopped. Started again. I'm Mark. It felt strange to hear his name in this context, like something personal had been handed over. She hesitated half a second before answering. Evelyn. He repeated it once under his breath, as if testing it. See you next week, he asked. The question wasn't heavy. Just open. She considered lying, saying she wasn't sure. Instead, she said, probably. He nodded. Neither of them moved for another second. Then she turned left. He went right. She didn't look back, but she was aware of the space he left behind as she walked away. And for the first time in months, the silence around her didn't feel entirely vacant. She didn't expect to think about him the next day. She had meetings stacked from morning to late afternoon, a contract negotiation at 9, a performance review at 11, a call with investors at 2. Her calendar was a wall of colored blocks. Tight. Efficient. Still, his voice slipped in between numbers. I kept her coat. She found herself staring at a slide during the investor call, realizing she hadn't heard the last question. Evelyn? Someone prompted. She blinked once. Yes, we're restructuring the timeline. The projection adjusts accordingly. Her tone was steady. No one noticed the pause. After the call, she closed her office door and stood by the window. The city below moved without hesitation. Cars, people, signals changing from red to green and back again. She pressed her thumb into her palm, feeling the slight ache. Objects become anchors. That phrase stayed with her longer than she wanted it to. That night, she didn't stay late. She told herself it was because she was tired. That was true. But it wasn't the only reason. At home, she set her bag down and went straight to the bedroom. She opened the top drawer of her dresser and took out her husband's watch. It was heavier than she remembered. The face was scratched slightly near the edge. He dropped it once while rushing out the door. He'd laughed about it later, Seta gave the watch character. She sat on the edge of the bed and turned it over in her hands. She could almost see the hospital room again. The thin blanket. The way the nurse avoided eye contact when she handed it to her. She had slipped it into her purse without looking at it. She hadn't worn it. It wasn't her style. She hadn't thrown it away either. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. She ignored it at first. It buzzed again. She stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Hello? A small pause. Hi. His voice. Quieter than at the church. Less guarded. She straightened without meaning to. Hi. I hope this isn't strange, he said. I got your number from the contact sheet. They pass it around for emergencies. She remembered signing that sheet weeks ago. She hadn't thought about it since. It's fine, she said. There was a faint sound on his end, like a door closing gently. I wasn't sure who else to call, he admitted. My son's at his mom's sister's tonight. The house is loud. She understood what he meant. Too quiet could feel loud. She looked down at the watch still resting in her palm. I know, she said softly. Another pause. Not empty, just careful. I almost donated the coat today, he said. She leaned back slightly against the headboard. What stopped you? I pictured him coming home and asking where it went. He exhaled. I didn't want to be the one who decided that. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. I took out his watch, she said after a moment. The words felt different over the phone. More direct. And? He asked. I'm still holding it. She could hear him shift, maybe sitting down. I don't think letting go is the same as forgetting, he said. She closed her eyes briefly. That sounds like something people say, she replied. A faint breath on the other end. Not quite a laugh. Yeah, he admitted. It does. Silence settled between them again. She didn't feel the need to fill it. It had been a long time since silence with another person felt neutral instead of demanding. "Do you ever feel—" he began, then stopped. "Feel what? Like if you start being okay, it means they matter less?" The question landed directly. Her grip tightened on the watch. "Yes," she said without hesitation. The honesty surprised her. "Yes," she repeated, quieter. On the other end, his breathing steadied slightly. "I thought that was just me," he said. "No," she replied. She looked around her bedroom. The neatly made bed, the lamp, the framed photograph on the dresser she rarely faced directly. The room didn't feel smaller, just less closed in. They talked for almost an hour. Not about grand things. About small moments. His son's question in the car about forgetting his mother's face. The way she still checked her phone some nights expecting a message that wouldn't come. The anger that surfaced at random, sharp and unreasonable. There were gaps in the conversation. Times when neither of them spoke for several seconds. No one rushed to apologize for it. At some point, she realized she was sitting cross-legged on the bed, the watch resting loosely in her lap instead of clutched tight. "Do you think," he said slowly, "that we're supposed to stay like this?" "Like what? Half here?" The question lingered. She considered it carefully. "I don't know what we're supposed to do," she said. "I only know I can't keep pretending this is enough." Her voice had dropped lower without her noticing. "Enough?" he asked. "Working, sleeping, existing." She inhaled slowly. "It feels thin." He didn't argue. "I don't want my son to think this is how life works," he said after a while. "Just surviving." The word stayed between them. Surviving. She looked down at the watch again. Slowly, almost absent-mindedly, she fastened it around her wrist. It felt foreign, cool against her skin. "I put it on," she said quietly. There was a short pause. "Does it feel wrong?" he asked. She flexed her wrist once. "No," she admitted. "It just feels new." He let out a breath she hadn't realized he'd been holding. "That's something," he said. The clock on her wall ticked softly. "I should let you go," she said eventually. "Yeah," he replied. Neither of them moved to end the call. "Next week?" he asked again, more certain this time. "Yes," she said. After she hung up, she didn't take the watch off. She lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. Her chest didn't feel light. But it didn't feel as tight either. Across the city, he sat at his kitchen table long after the call ended. The house was still quiet, but it no longer pressed in on him from all sides. He looked toward the hallway closet. He didn't open it. Not tonight. Instead, he stood up, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. For the first time in months, when he lay down, the empty side of the bed didn't feel like a warning. It just felt like space. The third week they spoke outside the group, it stopped feeling like a coincidence. They didn't say it out loud. Neither of them did. But when the chairs scraped back and people began folding coats over their arms, they both moved slower than they needed to. Evelyn stayed near the coffee table, pretending to read a flyer taped to the wall. The paper was old, corners curling. She wasn't reading anything. Mark stood near the doorway with his hands in his pockets, watching the last few people leave. He nodded politely when someone passed. His smile was brief, automatic. When the room finally emptied, the silence returned in a cleaner way. The facilitator turned off the overhead lights, leaving only the dim ones near the hallway. "Lock up when you're done," she said to no one in particular, then walked out. Mark waited until the door shut before speaking. "You want to walk?" he asked. Evelyn's first instinct was to check her phone, her calendar, some excuse. But she didn't. "Okay," she said. Outside, the air had that damp smell of cold pavement. It hadn't rained, but the ground still looked dark under the streetlights. Their footsteps were the only sound for a while. They didn't head toward their cars. They just walked. Mark kept his hands in his pockets. Evelyn's arms stayed close to her sides, her coat buttoned up even though she wasn't cold. The watch on her wrist caught the light when she moved. Mark noticed it. He didn't comment right away. He let it sit there, like he wasn't sure he had the right. A few blocks passed. Finally, he said, "You're wearing it." Evelyn looked down at her wrist as if she'd forgotten. Yes, she said. Mark nodded once. How does it feel now? Evelyn took a breath, less like stealing. That answer surprised even her. She felt at the moment she said it, the weight of it. Mark didn't flinch. He didn't look away. I know that feeling, he said. They crossed an intersection. A car sped by, tires hissing softly on the road. A couple walked past them, holding hands. Evelyn's eyes followed them for half a second longer than she meant to. Mark saw it. He didn't mention that either. They ended up in a small park. Not a nice one. Just a patch of grass, a few benches, and a broken fountain that no one bothered fixing. The streetlight nearest the bench flickered slightly, casting uneven shadows. Mark sat first. Evelyn sat beside him, leaving a careful distance. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Mark stared at the ground. Evelyn watched her own hands. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was heavy, but familiar now. Mark's voice came out low. Sometimes I think I'm waiting for someone to tell me it's allowed, he said. Evelyn didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. Allowed, she repeated softly. Mark nodded. His jaw tightened. I get up, I do everything. I make sure he eats, I make sure he sleeps, I make sure he laughs at least once a day. His fingers flexed inside his pockets, and I keep thinking, this is all I'm allowed to do now. Evelyn felt her throat tighten, but she didn't show it. She looked at him. His face was calm, but the muscles around his mouth were strained, like he was holding something back. Who's stopping you? She asked. Mark didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the ground. Me, he said finally. Evelyn's breath came out slowly. She wanted to say something comforting, something clean, but nothing clean fit. So she said the truth. I don't know what to do with myself when I'm not working, she admitted. Mark turned his head slightly toward her. Evelyn stared straight ahead, the park empty in front of them. I thought grief would look like sadness, she said. I didn't expect it to feel like boredom. Mark blinked once, surprised. Evelyn continued, voice still controlled. Not boredom, like I don't care. Boredom like there's nothing inside the hours anymore. She swallowed. My life used to have a second person in it. Even when he wasn't in the room, he was part of the day, part of the decisions. Mark listened without interrupting. Evelyn's fingers moved against the sleeve of her coat. Small, restless movements. Now I come home and it's just walls, she said. And if I stay in the office until midnight, at least I don't have to hear them. Mark exhaled through his nose, slow. That makes sense, he said. Evelyn glanced at him. It shouldn't. It does, he said again, firmer. She looked away. The streetlight flickered again. Mark shifted slightly on the bench. The distance between them remained, but it felt less intentional now, more like habit. My son asked me something last night, Mark said. Evelyn waited. He asked if Mom can see us. His voice tightened. He said maybe she's watching, maybe she gets lonely. Evelyn's eyes lowered to her hands. What did you say? She asked. Mark hesitated. I told him yes, he said. I told him she sees him, that she knows he's trying. His throat moved when he swallowed. And then he said, he hopes she sees me, too. Evelyn's chest tightened. Mark's voice stayed steady, but the words didn't. He said he wants her to know I'm still here. Mark's eyes finally lifted. And I didn't know what to do with that. Evelyn didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, you didn't lie. Mark turned slightly toward her. Evelyn kept her gaze forward. You told him what he needed, she said, and what you needed. Mark stared at her for a long time, as if he was trying to understand how she could say something so simple without breaking. His voice came out quieter. Do you ever talk to him? He asked. Evelyn's fingers went still. She didn't pretend she didn't understand. Yes, she said. Mark waited. Evelyn's throat tightened, but she kept her tone level. Not out loud, she admitted. Not in the house. She paused. But in the car. Sometimes, when I'm alone. Mark nodded slowly. Evelyn glanced at him, then away again. I tell him about the day, she said. I tell him what went wrong, what went right. Her mouth tightened slightly. I still ask him questions, which is stupid because I know there's no answer. Mark's voice was careful. What questions? Evelyn's jaw clenched. She didn't want to say it, but she did. Why didn't you call me back, she said. The words came out flat, but they landed hard. Mark's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Something like understanding. Something like pain. Evelyn stared at the empty park. My last message was angry, she said. Not furious. Just, she swallowed. Impatient. He said he'd be home by 8. He wasn't. I left a voicemail. Her fingers curled slightly. I told him I was tired of being second to his work, she said quietly. Mark didn't interrupt. Evelyn's voice dropped, and then he died. The sentence sat between them. The streetlight above them flickered again, then steadied. Mark's hands came out of his pockets. He rubbed them together once, like he was cold. You didn't kill him, he said. Evelyn let out a short breath, almost sharp. That's easy for you to say. Mark turned fully toward her now. His face stayed calm, but his eyes were darker. No, he said. It's not easy. Evelyn's throat tightened. Mark stared at her for a second longer, then looked away again. I wasn't there, he said. Evelyn blinked. Mark's voice was low, controlled. When she went downhill, I wasn't there. I was at work. I was in a meeting. His jaw tightened. The hospital called. They said I should come. I told them I was on my way. He swallowed hard. I wasn't, he admitted. Evelyn turned toward him. Mark stared at the ground again, as if he couldn't stand looking at her while he said it. I finished the meeting, he said. I told myself it was important. I told myself I had time. His voice dipped. When I got there, she was already gone. Evelyn didn't move. She felt something shift in her chest. Not relief, not comfort. Recognition. Mark's hands clenched and unclenched once. I've never told anyone that, he said. Evelyn's breath caught slightly. She didn't reach for him. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just said, I'm sorry. Mark nodded once, but his eyes stayed fixed on the ground. After a moment, he spoke again. I think that's why I came to the group, he said. Not because I missed her. I mean, I did. His voice tightened, but because I couldn't stand being the person who let that happen. Evelyn's fingers curled around the edge of the bench. She looked down at the watch on her wrist. The metal felt cold against her skin. She thought about her own office. The night she stayed late, the way she always assumed she would have more time. Time was a cruel thing. It always looked infinite until it wasn't. Mark shifted slightly closer on the bench. Not enough to touch, just enough that Evelyn noticed. I don't think anyone understands that kind of guilt, he said, unless they've lived in it. Evelyn's throat tightened. She stared at the park, empty and dim. Then she nodded once. I do, she said. The words came out almost like a confession. Mark's shoulders loosened a fraction. They sat there for a long time after that, not speaking. A car passed on the nearby road. Somewhere a dog barked once and then stopped. A wind moved through the trees. Evelyn realized her hands were trembling slightly. She pressed them together to hide it. Mark's gaze flicked toward her hands, then away. He didn't point it out. That small kindness felt heavier than most words. When they finally stood, their movements were slow, like their bodies were reluctant to break the quiet. They walked back toward the street. Evelyn stopped at the corner where the light was brighter. Mark stopped too. He looked at her for a moment, not searching her face, just seeing it. I'm glad you came tonight, he said. Evelyn nodded once. Me too. She hesitated, then added, Don't finish meetings anymore. The words were blunt, not meant to be advice, just a line drawn. Mark's mouth tightened slightly. I won't, he said. Evelyn didn't know if he meant it. She didn't know if she could mean it either, but she believed he wanted to. They stood there another moment, Then Mark said, "Good night, Evelyn." "Good night," she replied. She turned and walked toward her car. Halfway there, she glanced down at her wrist again. The watch face caught the streetlight. For the first time since the funeral, she didn't feel like she was wearing something borrowed. She felt like she was carrying something forward. Not replacing. Not erasing. Just carrying. He didn't tell her about the letter. Not that night. Not the next week either. It stayed where it always stayed, now folded once, then folded again, tucked inside the back pocket of his wallet like something fragile. The paper had softened at the edges from being handled too many times. The ink was still clear. He'd read it so often he could hear her voice in the spaces between the lines. It wasn't a long letter. That was the part that hurt most. She hadn't written a speech. She hadn't explained herself. She'd just written enough to leave him with something he couldn't undo. He sat in his car after dropping his son at school. The parking lot still full of parents coming and going, and he stared at his wallet on the passenger seat. He didn't take the letter out. He didn't have time. He never had time when it mattered. His phone buzzed. A message from his boss. A reminder about an afternoon meeting. Something about deadlines. Something about urgency. He stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then he turned the car on and drove to work. The day passed the way it always did now. Quick, crowded, dull. People spoke to him like he was normal, like his life wasn't split in two, like the person he used to be was still sitting behind his eyes. Around noon, he got a call from the school. His son had a fever. He left work immediately. No meeting finished. No excuse offered. He just stood up, grabbed his keys, and walked out while someone was still mid-sentence. His hands shook the whole drive. Not because he thought it was serious. Kids got fevers. Kids got sick. He knew that. But the moment the school number appeared on his screen, something inside him collapsed. His mind went straight to the hospital, straight to the beeping machines, straight to the helplessness. He walked into the nurse's office too fast. His son was lying on a narrow cot with a small blanket pulled up to his chest. His cheeks were flushed. His hair was damp at the temples. When he saw Mark, his eyes opened wider. "Dad," he whispered. Mark sat down immediately and pressed the back of his hand to his son's forehead. Hot. Not dangerously hot, but enough. "It's okay," Mark said quietly. His voice was calm. His hands weren't. "I'm here." His son's eyelids fluttered. "I feel weird," he murmured. "I know," Mark said. The nurse handed him a paper with instructions. She spoke in a practiced voice about rest and fluids. Mark nodded through it all, barely listening. He carried his son out to the car, holding him tighter than necessary. His son didn't complain. At home, he laid him on the couch and turned on a cartoon. His son watched it without laughing. Mark made soup. He barely tasted. He checked his son's temperature every 30 minutes. He sat beside him like his presence could keep the fever from rising. At some point, his son fell asleep. Mark stayed there anyway. His phone buzzed several times. Work. Missed calls. Emails. He ignored them. Then, late afternoon, his phone buzzed again. Evelyn. Her name on the screen made him sit up slightly, like his body had been waiting for it. He answered quietly. "Hey, is this a bad time?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but he could hear something in it. Something careful. "No," he said. "I'm home." There was a short pause. "You sound different," she said. He glanced at his son, still sleeping. "My kid's sick," he said. Evelyn's voice softened in a way he hadn't heard from her in the office tone she usually carried. "Is he okay?" Mark nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Yeah," he said, "just a fever." But he stopped himself. Evelyn didn't rush him. Mark exhaled. "It messes with my head," he admitted. "I understand," she said. He believed her. He leaned back against the couch, eyes on his son's face. "What about you?" he asked. "You okay?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. He could hear faint background noise. Traffic, maybe, or the low hum of an office building. "I left early," she said finally. Mark's eyebrows lifted slightly. That's new, he said. Evelyn let out a small breath. Yes, she said, it is. He could picture her saying it with that restrained expression, as if leaving early was something she had to justify. Mark didn't tease her. Instead, he said, good. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, do you ever feel like you're waiting for punishment? The question was blunt. Mark's throat tightened. Yes, he said. He didn't ask why she'd said it. He didn't need to. Evelyn's voice dropped slightly. I was in a meeting today, she said. Someone made a joke about how people should stop driving distracted. Mark's jaw tightened. I don't know why it hit me, she continued. It wasn't even directed at me. It was nothing. Mark stared at his son again. But he understood exactly why it hit her. Because everything was directed at them now. Every accident, every siren, every late phone call, every headline. Evelyn's voice was steady but thin. I excused myself, she said. I walked into the bathroom and locked the door. Mark didn't respond right away. He imagined her standing there alone, gripping the sink, trying not to fall apart where anyone could hear. He said quietly, Did you cry? Evelyn's pause was long. No, she said, not really. Mark didn't believe her. But he didn't challenge it. Instead, he said, You still did the right thing, leaving. Evelyn exhaled. Is that what this is? She asked. Doing the right thing? Mark swallowed. I don't know, he admitted, but it feels like something. Evelyn was quiet again. Mark could hear her breathing. Then she said, I keep thinking I should stop talking to you. Mark's stomach tightened. He didn't answer right away. He didn't want to sound defensive. He didn't want to sound needy. So he asked, Why? Evelyn's voice stayed calm. Because it's the only part of my life right now that feels honest, she said. And that scares me. Mark closed his eyes briefly. He could feel his heartbeat in his throat. I'm scared too, he admitted. Evelyn didn't respond right away. Then she said, People would misunderstand. Mark's eyes opened. People misunderstand everything, he said. Evelyn let out a quiet breath, almost like she was relieved he'd said it. Mark looked down at his hands. His fingers were still trembling slightly. I'm not trying to replace her, he said suddenly. The words came out before he could stop them. Evelyn's voice was immediate. I know. Mark swallowed hard. I don't want my son to think. He stopped. His jaw tightened. I don't want him to think she was temporary. Evelyn's voice softened. She wasn't, she said. Mark's throat burned. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, but it didn't crush him. It felt like the kind of silence that came after someone said something true. After a moment, Evelyn spoke again. I'm driving, she said. Mark frowned slightly. Where? Evelyn hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. I just got in the car. Mark stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then he said, Come here. Evelyn didn't answer right away. Mark's voice stayed calm. My son's asleep, he said. I'm not asking you to do anything. Just sit, if you want. The pause stretched. He could almost hear her thinking, measuring the risk, imagining the headlines in her mind before they even existed. Finally, she said, Okay. Mark gave her the address. When he hung up, his hand shook harder. He didn't know why he'd asked. He did know. He just didn't want to admit it. 25 minutes later, a car pulled into his driveway. He watched from the living room window. He didn't turn on the porch light. Evelyn stepped out, coat buttoned, hair pulled back. She looked around once, quickly, like she expected someone to be watching. Then she walked up the steps. Mark opened the door before she could knock. They stood there for a moment, facing each other. The hallway light behind him cast a warm glow on the floor. Evelyn's face was composed, but her eyes looked tired in a way makeup couldn't hide. Mark stepped aside. She walked in. The house smelled like soup and children's medicine. Evelyn glanced toward the living room, then the stairs. Is he okay? She asked quietly. Mark nodded. Evelyn's shoulders loosened slightly. She took her coat off and held it over her arm, unsure where to put it. Mark pointed toward the chair. She laid it down carefully. Then she stood in the middle of his living room like she didn't know what to do with her own body. Mark didn't offer coffee. He didn't offer anything. He just said, "You can sit." Evelyn sat on the edge of the couch, posture straight. Mark sat in the chair across from her. They didn't speak right away. The TV was off. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of the heater turning on. Evelyn looked around. There were toys in the corner. A small pair of shoes by the door. A child's drawing taped to the fridge, visible from where she sat. The normality of it made her expression shift. "Your life still looks like a life," she said softly. Mark's jaw tightened. "It doesn't feel like one," he replied. Evelyn nodded slowly. She looked down at her wrist. The watch was still there. She turned it slightly, adjusting it without needing to. Then she said, "I don't think I've been in someone's house since he died." Mark didn't ask why. He just said, "Yeah." Evelyn's eyes lifted to his. Her voice dropped. "I didn't know where to put myself," she admitted. Mark leaned forward slightly. "Neither do I," he said. They sat there with the truth between them. No dramatic confession. No big moment. Just two people in a quiet room, both exhausted from carrying their grief alone. After a long silence, Evelyn's hands started shaking. She looked at them like she was surprised. Then she pressed them together, hard, trying to stop it. Mark watched. He didn't say anything. He stood up slowly, crossed the room, and sat beside her on the couch. Not touching. Just closer. Evelyn's breathing hitched once, small and sharp. Mark stared straight ahead. "I don't know what we're doing," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded, still staring at her hands. "I don't either," she whispered. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. It was the first time he'd heard it. The first time she'd sounded like she might actually break. Mark didn't reach for her. Not yet. He just stayed there. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Close enough that she didn't have to pretend she was fine. Evelyn's shoulders sagged slowly, like her body had been waiting for permission. She didn't cry loudly. She didn't collapse. She just covered her mouth with her hand and let the tears come out silently, the way someone cries when they don't want to disturb anyone. Mark sat beside her, still facing forward. His eyes burned. He didn't wipe them. He didn't move. He let her have the moment without taking it from her. Upstairs, his son coughed once in his sleep. Both of them froze. Evelyn's tears stopped instantly. Her eyes widened. Mark listened. The house went quiet again. Mark exhaled slowly. Evelyn's shoulders dropped, trembling. She whispered, "I'm sorry." Mark shook his head once. "Don't," he said. Evelyn wiped her face quickly, embarrassed, angry at herself for losing control. Mark didn't look at her while she did it. He kept his gaze fixed on the blank TV screen. Then he said, so quietly it barely carried, "You don't have to apologize for being human in my house." Evelyn's breath caught. She stared at him, and for a second her expression looked almost lost. Then she looked away again. Outside, the streetlight flickered through the window. Inside, neither of them moved, and for the first time since their spouses died, the quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt like shelter. The next morning she woke up with the strange feeling that she'd done something she couldn't undo. It wasn't regret. It wasn't relief either. It was something closer to exposure. Evelyn lay in bed for a long time staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the night in small fragments that felt sharper than they should have. The smell of soup. The child's shoes by the door. The way Mark had sat beside her without touching her, as if he understood exactly how fragile she was trying to stay. And the sentence he'd said at the end, "You don't have to apologize for being human in my house." She could still hear it. Not like a romantic line. Not like comfort. Like something real. Something that left a mark. She got up, showered, dressed, and went to work earlier than usual. The office lobby was quiet, almost sterile. The security guard nodded at her. She nodded back, without slowing down. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor. She wanted the sound. She wanted something hard. In the elevator, she checked her phone. No messages. No missed calls. She stared at Mark's contact name for a moment longer than necessary. Then she locked her phone and slipped it into her bag. At her desk, she opened her laptop. The screen filled with emails, meeting requests, reports. The normal chaos of business. She answered quickly, efficiently. She almost convinced herself the night before hadn't happened. Then her assistant knocked. "Good morning," her assistant said. "The board moved the meeting to noon." Evelyn didn't look up. "Fine." Her assistant hesitated. Evelyn's fingers paused over the keyboard. "What?" she asked. "There's something else." The assistant's voice tightened slightly, like she didn't want to deliver the next part. A reporter called. Evelyn's eyes lifted. "About what?" The assistant swallowed. "They asked if you were seeing someone." The words landed cleanly, like a slap. Evelyn didn't react immediately. She kept her face neutral, controlled, but she felt heat crawl up the back of her neck. "Who?" she asked. The assistant gave a name. A local business journalist. Not a tabloid, but close enough. The kind of person who pretended to write about leadership and strategy, but lived for personal damage. Evelyn's mouth tightened. "Did you respond?" she asked. "No," her assistant said quickly. "I told them we don't comment on personal matters." Evelyn nodded once. "Good," she said. Her assistant lingered for a moment. "Should I inform legal?" she asked. Evelyn stared at her screen. The numbers blurred slightly. "Yes," she said, "and tell them to monitor it." The assistant left. Evelyn sat still. She didn't breathe properly for a few seconds. She thought of Mark's driveway, the quiet neighborhood, the way Evelyn had looked around before stepping inside. Someone had seen her, or someone had followed her. She felt a cold, slow anger rise in her stomach. Not fear, not exactly. Anger that she had been watched in a moment that had been private. Anger that grief still wasn't allowed to be messy. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her CFO. "Board wants to address optics. Call me when free." Optics. The word made her jaw clench. She stared at the message without replying. Then she stood up, grabbed her coat, and walked out of her office. She didn't announce where she was going. She drove without thinking, hands tight on the wheel, breathing shallow. Mark's neighborhood came into view sooner than she expected. She parked 2 houses away from his, not in his driveway. She didn't want to be obvious. She walked to his door anyway, her heels hitting the pavement with quiet force. She knocked once. Mark opened it almost immediately, like he'd been awake for hours. He looked surprised to see her. Then he looked at her face, and the surprise changed. "What happened?" he asked. Evelyn stepped inside without waiting to be invited. Mark closed the door behind her. The house smelled like coffee this time. And toast. Something warm. Evelyn stood in the hallway, breathing fast, eyes scanning the room like she expected something to jump out. Mark's voice stayed calm. "Evelyn," he said, "what happened?" She turned toward him. "They called," she said. Mark frowned. "Who?" "The press," she replied. The words came out clipped, sharp. Mark's face tightened immediately. "About what?" he asked, though he already knew. Evelyn's hands clenched. "About me," she said. "About my personal life. About whether I'm seeing someone." Mark went still. He stared at her like he was trying to calculate how serious it was. "How would they know?" he asked quietly. Evelyn let out a short breath. "That's what I'm asking." Mark's eyes dropped to the floor for a moment. Then he looked up again. "You think someone saw you here?" Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to. Mark nodded once, slowly, as if he was absorbing the reality. He didn't look pleased. He didn't look flattered. He looked tired. "I didn't think," he started. Evelyn's voice cut in. "I did," she said. "That's why I hesitated before I came in. I looked around. I knew it could happen." Her mouth tightened, and I still came inside anyway. Mark stared at her. The silence between them shifted. It wasn't the soft kind from the night before. This one had edges. Evelyn looked down at her wrist. The watch was there, still ticking. She hadn't taken it off. She hadn't even considered it. Mark's voice was quiet. "Is this going to hurt you?" Evelyn laughed once, but it wasn't humor. "Yes," she said. "Of course it is." Mark's jaw tightened. "And you came here anyway," he said. Evelyn's eyes lifted. "I didn't come here to blame you," she said. "I came here because I needed to say it out loud to someone who would understand what it means." Mark nodded. His gaze flicked toward the stairs. "Is your son here?" Evelyn asked. Mark shook his head. "School." Evelyn's shoulders loosened slightly. She exhaled and stepped forward into the living room. Mark followed her. Evelyn sat on the couch, posture stiff. Her hands rested on her knees, fingers locked together. Mark stood near the doorway, watching her. She hated that she looked like she needed help. She hated that she was in his house again. But she also felt relief she hadn't expected. Mark spoke quietly. "What are you going to do?" Evelyn's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. "I don't know," she admitted. Mark didn't push. He walked to the kitchen and poured her a glass of water. He handed it to her without saying anything. Evelyn took it. Her hands shook slightly as she brought it to her lips. She drank. The cold water steadied her. Mark sat across from her in the chair again, the same place he'd sat the night before. His posture was different now, more alert. "Did they mention me?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated. "No," she said. Then she corrected herself. "Not yet." Mark nodded. Evelyn's voice tightened. "They're going to start looking," she said. "They'll dig. They'll find out who you are. They'll look at your kid. Your wife." Mark's face changed at the mention of his wife. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he said quietly, "I don't want my son in this." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I know," she said. Mark leaned forward slightly. "Evelyn," he said, "I need you to tell me something." She looked up. His eyes were steady. "Are you prepared to walk away?" he asked. The question hit her hard. Not because it was unfair, because it was reasonable. Evelyn stared at him. Her mind flashed to her office. The boardroom. The way people watched her. The way her entire life had become something that belonged to other people's expectations. Then she thought of the night before. The couch. The silence. The shaking in her hands. The way she had cried without making noise. She swallowed. "I don't want to," she said. Mark didn't look relieved. He looked conflicted. Evelyn's voice stayed low. "I'm tired of walking away," she said. Mark's jaw tightened. Evelyn continued, the words coming slower now. "My husband is gone. That already happened. That already destroyed me." She inhaled. "And I'm not going to spend the rest of my life letting other people decide what I'm allowed to feel." Mark stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. But his face didn't soften, because he knew what it cost. Evelyn's phone buzzed again. She didn't look at it. Mark did. "Is that them?" he asked. Evelyn finally glanced at the screen. Her CFO again. Another message. "Legal says we should release a statement if rumors spread. Need your decision." Evelyn stared at it. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Mark watched her carefully. "What does your company expect you to do?" he asked. Evelyn's mouth tightened. "Disappear," she said. "Smile. Act like nothing happened. Keep my life clean." Mark's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what do you want to do?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the water glass in her hands. Then she said quietly, "I want to breathe." Mark's gaze held on her. His voice dropped. "I can't afford a scandal," he admitted. "Not because of me. Because of him." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I know," she said. The silence returned, but now it carried a decision inside it. Mark stood up and walked toward the hallway. He stopped at the closet door. Evelyn watched him. He didn't open it. He just rested his hand against it for a second, like he was reminding himself something was still there. Then he turned back. His voice was quiet. "If this becomes real," he said, "it has to be honest." Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. "It is real," she said. Mark's expression didn't change. "No," he replied. "I mean real enough to destroy things." Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. She understood. She had lived her whole life protecting what she built. She had learned how quickly people tore down what they didn't understand. She stood up slowly. Her voice was calm, but her hands were clenched. "I'm not here for a distraction," she said, "and I'm not here because I'm lonely." Mark's eyes stayed on hers. "I believe you," he said. Evelyn swallowed. "Then what do we do?" she asked. Mark didn't answer right away. He looked tired, older than he had at the support group, like the weight had shifted back onto his shoulders. Finally he said, "We stop hiding, but we don't rush." Evelyn nodded once. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't a promise. It was a plan that sounded like survival. But she could live with it. Mark walked her to the door. Before she stepped outside, she paused. She didn't look at him at first. She just said, "I'm sorry." Mark's brow furrowed. "For what?" he asked. Evelyn's voice tightened. "For bringing this to your house," she said. "For letting it touch your son." Mark stared at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "It touched him the day she died." Evelyn's breath caught. Mark's voice stayed even. "This is just another kind of risk." Evelyn nodded. She stepped outside. The air was colder than before. She walked to her car without looking around this time. If someone was watching, let them. She was too tired to keep flinching. By noon, the rumor had a shape. Not official, not printed, but circulating. A photo taken from across the street, grainy. Her car in his driveway. The timestamp visible in the corner. Late. It moved quietly through private group chats first. Then someone forwarded it. Then someone else. By the time she stepped into the boardroom, 3 of the directors had already seen it. No one mentioned it immediately. They spoke about numbers, revenue projections, expansion. But the air felt wrong. Thin. Evelyn delivered her presentation without missing a slide. Her voice stayed level. Her hands did not shake. She answered questions directly, corrected one assumption with precision. When she finished, there was a pause that lasted 1 second too long. Then Richard cleared his throat. "Before we adjourn," he said carefully, "we should address the situation." Evelyn didn't blink. "What situation?" she asked. He slid his tablet across the table. She didn't need to look. But she did. The photo was worse enlarged. Her car unmistakable. The angle obvious. Someone had been waiting. She set the tablet back down. "This is my personal life," she said. Richard's expression stayed polite. "You are the public face of this company." "I am also a person," she replied. Silence. Another director leaned forward. "Is it serious?" she asked bluntly. The question was not about love. It was about risk. Evelyn held her gaze. Yes. The word surprised even her. It felt heavier spoken aloud in that room. Another silence. Richard folded his hands. "We're not questioning your right to move forward," he said. "But perception matters. Investors care about stability." "My husband has been dead for over a year," she said evenly. "If stability requires permanent mourning, we should redefine the word." That landed harder than she intended. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Richard said, "We recommend a statement." Evelyn felt her pulse in her throat. What kind of statement? Transparent, respectful, controlled. Controlled. She nodded once. "I'll draft it," she said. The meeting ended shortly after. She walked back to her office alone, closed the door, locked it. For a moment she stood with her back against it. Her breathing was steady, but her chest felt tight. She crossed to her desk and sat down, opened a blank document, stared at the cursor. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. She had written dozens of public statements before. Apologies. clarifications, corporate responses to disasters that never felt personal. This one was different. This one required her to admit she was alive. Her phone buzzed. Mark. She answered immediately. I saw it, he said. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't panicked. It was quiet. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. I'm sorry, she said. Don't, he replied. There was a pause. Is this bad? He asked. Yes, she said. Another pause. Okay. The steadiness in his voice made her throat tighten. Your son, she started. He doesn't know, Mark said. And he won't. Not unless it becomes unavoidable. Evelyn nodded to herself. They want a statement, she said. Mark didn't answer immediately. What does that mean, he asked. It means I acknowledge it, she said. Publicly. And me? She swallowed. They'll know your name. Silence. Not the safe kind. Mark exhaled slowly. Then say it right, he said. Evelyn's eyes opened. What? If you're going to do it, he continued, voice steady, don't make it sound like a mistake. Her grip tightened on the phone. I wouldn't, she said. I know, he replied. That quiet confidence landed somewhere deep. She looked at the blank screen again. I don't want you dragged through something ugly, she said. I already was, he answered. The simplicity of it stopped her. She pressed her lips together. You didn't choose that, she said. No, he agreed. But I'm choosing this. Her breath caught slightly. She stared at the cursor, blinking. I don't want to lose you because I'm afraid, she said. The words slipped out before she could edit them. On the other end, she heard him inhale. You won't, he said. There was no drama in it, just certainty. She nodded once, even though he couldn't see it. I'll send you the draft, she said. Okay. They didn't hang up immediately. Finally, he said, Evelyn? Yes, don't shrink it. She almost smiled. I won't. After the call ended, she began typing. Not corporate language, not polished phrasing, just the truth. She acknowledged her husband's death. She acknowledged grief. She acknowledged that she had met someone through a support group. She stated clearly that this relationship did not conflict with her role. She did not apologize. She did not frame it as weakness. When she finished, her hands trembled slightly. She sent it to legal, then to Mark. His reply came 10 minutes later. It sounds like you. She read that twice. Then she approved the release. The article went live before sunset. Headlines were predictable, measured but sharp. Some praised her honesty. Some questioned her judgment. Some dissected the timeline like it was a financial chart. By evening, her inbox was full. Support, criticism, speculation. She didn't respond to any of it. She drove to Mark's house instead. This time she parked in the driveway. If someone wanted a photo, they could have it clearly. Mark opened the door before she knocked. He looked different. Not calmer, but resolved. It's out, she said. I know. He stepped aside. She walked in. The house felt the same. Normal. Warm. His son was in the living room coloring. When the boy looked up and saw her, he paused. Evelyn froze. Mark stepped forward slightly. This is Evelyn, he said gently, from the group. The boy studied her, then nodded once. Hi, he said. Hi, she replied softly. Her voice felt fragile in front of him. The boy went back to coloring. Mark led her into the kitchen. He poured 2 glasses of water without asking. They stood across from each other. Are you okay? He asked. Evelyn considered it. No, she said. Mark nodded. Me neither. They both let that settle. No pretending. No pretending they were brave. Just standing in the middle of consequences they had chosen. Mark stepped closer. Not abruptly. Slowly. Evelyn felt the space between them shrink. Her pulse quickened. Not from fear. From exposure. If this gets worse, he said quietly, we deal with it. She nodded. And if it costs you? She asked. Mark's eyes didn't waver. Then, it costs me. Her throat tightened. Upstairs, a door closed softly. A reminder. There was a child in this house. A future that required protection. Evelyn inhaled slowly. "We take it slow," she said. Mark nodded. "Yes." They stood there for another moment. Then, carefully, he reached for her hand. Not urgent, not hidden, just deliberate. She looked down at their hands. His fingers were warm, her watch pressed lightly against his wrist. For a second, guilt flickered. Then something steadier replaced it. Not erasure. Not replacement. Something new layered over something old. Upstairs, his son laughed at something on television. The sound moved through the house like proof of life. Evelyn squeezed Mark's hand once. He squeezed back. Outside, somewhere down the street, a car slowed. Maybe someone looked. Maybe not. Inside, neither of them let go. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was chosen. The first real consequence didn't come from the press. It came from someone who had known him before. Mark was in the grocery store after work, pushing a cart with one hand and holding his son's list in the other. The list was written in messy pencil. Half words, half drawings. Milk. Cereal. Those round crackers. Mark stopped in the aisle to read it again, pretending he didn't already know what his son meant. He liked the list. It was something his son did now, like it mattered. He reached for a box of cereal and felt a familiar stiffness in his shoulders. That quiet sense that someone was watching. He turned his head. A woman stood at the end of the aisle holding a basket, mid-40s. Hair pulled back. Expression tight, not unfriendly but loaded. He recognized her immediately. Lisa. His wife's sister. He hadn't seen her in months. Not since the last argument. She stared at him for a moment like she was deciding whether to approach. Then she walked toward him. Mark felt his stomach drop. He put the cereal box in the cart slowly, buying himself time. Lisa stopped a few feet away. Her eyes moved over him quickly, like she was looking for proof of something. "Hi," she said. Her voice wasn't warm. Mark nodded. "Hi." There was a pause. The grocery store around them kept moving. A cart rattled past. A child whined near the freezer section. Lisa held his gaze. "I saw the article," she said. Mark didn't respond. His jaw tightened slightly. Lisa's mouth pulled into something close to a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "So it's true," she said. "You're with her." Mark exhaled slowly through his nose. "It's not like that," he said. Lisa's eyebrows lifted. "Not like that?" she repeated. "Then explain it to me." "Because it looks exactly like that." Mark's grip tightened on the cart handle. He didn't want to do this here. Under fluorescent lights. Between cereal boxes and discounted snacks. But Lisa had never cared about timing. She cared about control. "We met at a support group," he said. "We talk." Lisa laughed once, sharp. "And she's just a friend?" Mark didn't answer immediately. Lisa leaned forward slightly. "You have a son," she said, voice lower now. "You have a responsibility." Mark's eyes narrowed. "I know," he said. Lisa stared at him. Then she said, "Does she?" Mark's jaw clenched hard. Lisa continued, her tone tightening with every word. "My sister is dead," she said. "And you're already playing house with some CEO you met in the church basement." Mark's throat tightened. He felt heat rise behind his eyes, but he forced it down. "She's not some," he started. Lisa cut him off. "Do you know what people are saying?" she asked. "Do you know what they're saying about you? About her?" Mark swallowed. "I don't care," he said. Lisa's eyes flashed. "You should," she said, "because your son is going to hear it." That landed. Mark's hand tightened on the cart so hard his knuckles turned pale. Lisa watched him, satisfied that she'd hit the right place. She lowered her voice again. "If you bring her around him," she said, "you're making a mistake you won't be able to take back." Mark's chest tightened. "She hasn't done anything to him," Mark said. Lisa's eyes narrowed. "She's not his mother," she replied. Mark stared at her. The sentence was obvious, but it carried a threat. Lisa leaned closer. "You know what I think?" she said quietly. "I think you just can't stand being alone. And you found someone who makes you feel important again." Mark felt something cold settle in his stomach. He didn't know if it was anger or fear. He looked at Lisa and realized she wasn't grieving anymore. She was guarding territory. Mark spoke carefully. "I'm not replacing her," he said. "I'm not trying to." Lisa's expression tightened. "You don't get to decide what it looks like," she said. Mark took a slow breath. He didn't want to yell. He didn't want to give her the satisfaction. But his voice came out firmer than he expected. "I get to decide what my life is," he said. Lisa stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Her face went calm again, too calm. "Fine," she said. "Then I'll decide what my role is." Mark's stomach tightened. Lisa turned away, walking down the aisle like nothing had happened. Mark stood still. The store felt louder now. His son's list trembled slightly in his hand. Mark stared down at it. Milk, cereal, crackers. Normal words. Normal life. But his hands were shaking. He pushed the cart forward again, forcing his body to keep moving. When he got to the car, he sat in the driver's seat and didn't start the engine. He stared at the steering wheel, breathing shallowly. Then he pulled his wallet out and took out the folded letter. His wife's handwriting. The paper worn soft at the creases. He unfolded it slowly. Read it again, not because he needed to remember, because he needed to survive the next thing. Halfway through, his vision blurred. He wiped his eyes quickly, angry at himself. He folded the letter back and put it away. Then he started the car. Evelyn found out that night. Mark didn't tell her immediately. He tried to wait until after his son was asleep. He tried to make dinner. He tried to sit at the table like nothing had happened. But his mind kept replaying Lisa's voice. "You're playing house. Your son is going to hear it." He cleaned the kitchen too hard. Scrubbed the counter until his hands hurt. When his son finally went upstairs, Mark sat down on the couch and stared at the blank TV screen. He called Evelyn. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said. Mark's voice came out low. "I ran into Lisa." Evelyn didn't need to ask which Lisa. There was a pause. "She saw the article," Mark continued. She thinks I'm doing something wrong." Evelyn's voice stayed calm. "What did she say?" Mark hesitated. "She warned me," he admitted, "about my son." Evelyn's breath caught slightly on the other end. Mark heard it. Evelyn spoke carefully. "Is she going to try to take him?" Mark's throat tightened. "I don't know," he said. Evelyn went quiet. Mark could picture her sitting stiffly somewhere, mind already working, already calculating legal outcomes and reputational damage. Finally, Evelyn said, "I'm coming over." Mark's stomach tightened. "You don't have to," he said. "Yes," she replied. "I do." Her voice wasn't emotional. It was resolved. Mark didn't argue. He gave her the address even though she already had it. After the call ended, Mark sat very still. He stared at the hallway closet. The coat was still there. He stood up and walked toward it. His hand reached for the door. He stopped. He didn't open it. He just leaned his forehead against the wood, and for the first time in a long time, he let himself feel the full fear underneath everything. Not fear of being alone. Fear of losing his son. Fear of failing again. Fear that every time he tried to move forward, life would punish him for it. He stood there until he heard tires on the driveway. Then he stepped back and opened the front door. Evelyn walked in quickly, coat still on, hair slightly messier than usual. Her face was controlled, but her eyes looked sharp. She looked past him immediately, scanning the house. "Where is he?" she asked. "Asleep," Mark said. Evelyn nodded once. Then she looked at Mark fully. "What exactly did she say?" Evelyn asked. Mark exhaled. He told her, not all at once. Piece by piece. Lisa's tone. The threats disguised as concern. The way she had said his son's name like it belonged to her. Evelyn listened without interrupting. Her jaw tightened slowly as he spoke. When he finished, Evelyn was quiet. Then she said, "She's going to try to control this." Mark nodded. Evelyn's eyes stayed fixed on him. "She doesn't care about your healing," Evelyn said. "She cares about ownership." Mark swallowed. "That's what it felt like," he admitted. Evelyn stepped closer. Mark expected her to touch his hand. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Mark stared at it. "What is that?" he asked. Evelyn's voice was calm. "Contacts," she said. "Family law. Crisis management. Security." Mark blinked. "You did that already?" Evelyn's eyes didn't waver. "I told you," she said. "If it gets worse, we deal with it." Mark stared at the folder like it was something dangerous. He felt a strange mix of gratitude and discomfort. This was Evelyn's world. Solving problems, building walls, planning for worst outcomes. Mark's voice came out quiet. "I don't want a war," he said. Evelyn's expression tightened. "I don't either," she replied. "But she's already starting one." Mark looked away. His throat tightened. Evelyn watched him for a moment. Then she said something softer. "Mark," she said, "look at me." He didn't want to. He did anyway. Evelyn's voice dropped. "You are not doing something wrong by being alive," she said. Mark's eyes burned. He didn't respond. Evelyn continued, her tone controlled but real. "You didn't betray her," she said. "You didn't erase her." Mark swallowed hard. Evelyn's gaze held his. "And if your son needs protection," she added, "then we protect him. Together." Mark's breath caught. The word "together" landed differently than anything else. Not romantic, not dramatic, just solid. Mark nodded once, slowly. Evelyn stepped back. She glanced toward the stairs. "Does he know about me?" she asked. Mark shook his head. "Not really. He just knows you're someone." Evelyn nodded. Her mouth tightened slightly. "Then we keep it that way," she said. "For now." Mark watched her, realizing she wasn't panicking. She was steady, the kind of steadiness he had needed the day his wife died and didn't have. Mark's voice came out quiet. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. Evelyn looked at him. "I don't either," she said, "but I know how to stay." Mark's throat tightened. He stared at her for a moment. Then he nodded. Outside, the street was dark and quiet. Inside, the house felt tense but not empty. Mark walked to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of tea. Evelyn sat at the table. When he placed the cup in front of her, she wrapped her hands around it like she needed the warmth. They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to. The danger wasn't immediate yet. But it was close enough to feel, and Mark understood something then, sitting across from her in the dim kitchen light. Grief wasn't the only thing that followed them. The living did too. The next week moved slowly. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because every normal moment felt unstable now, like it could be interrupted at any time. Mark walked his son to school instead of driving. It took longer. The air was cold. His son complained about his gloves. Mark listened without really hearing him. He kept looking over his shoulder, not because he expected Lisa to appear on the sidewalk, because he didn't know what she would do, and that uncertainty made his body stay tense all day. His son didn't notice, or maybe he did and didn't say anything. Children were strange that way. They could sense fear without knowing its name. At work, Mark couldn't focus. He sat through meetings with his laptop open, eyes on the screen, mind somewhere else. His boss spoke to him twice, and Mark nodded like he understood. He didn't. Around 3 in the afternoon, he checked his phone and saw a message from Evelyn. "Do you have a copy of the custody agreement?" He stared at it for a moment. Then he replied, "Yes, at home." "Why?" Her response came quickly. "Lisa can't take him without a fight. I want to be sure what she's legally allowed to do." Mark felt his throat tighten. He didn't like the word fight. He didn't like the idea of lawyers touching his son's life. But he also didn't like the idea of losing him. That night, after his son went to bed, Mark took the custody papers out of a drawer and read them slowly at the kitchen table. The language was cold, precise, like it belonged to strangers. He kept seeing his wife's face as he read, not her in the hospital, her in the kitchen, laughing while stirring something on the stove, hair tied up messily, sleeves rolled to her elbows. He wondered what she would say if she could see this. He wondered if she would hate him for letting someone else step into their life, or if she would hate him for staying alone. The thought made his stomach twist. He folded the papers back up and stared at the table for a long time. Then he called Evelyn. She answered immediately. "I'm looking at it now," she said. Mark didn't ask how she got it. He knew she'd already arranged for him to send a scan. "What do you think?" he asked. Evelyn's voice was calm. "She doesn't have standing," she said. "Not unless she can prove you're unfit." Mark's jaw tightened. "I'm not," he said. "I know," Evelyn replied. The certainty in her voice steadied him for a moment. Then Evelyn said, "But she can still cause problems." Mark exhaled. "Yes," he said. "That's what she wants." There was a pause. Mark stared at the dark kitchen window. "I don't want my son to hate me," he admitted. Evelyn didn't answer right away. Then she said quietly, "He won't." Mark's throat tightened. "You don't know that," he said. Evelyn's voice stayed even. "I know what it looks like when a parent is trying," she said. "Even when they're scared. Even when they fail sometimes." Mark swallowed hard. He didn't respond. Evelyn continued, softer now. "If Lisa tries to poison him against you, she'll have to lie," she said. "And children can feel lies." Mark's eyes closed briefly. "Can they?" he asked. Evelyn's voice was quiet. "Yes," she said. "They just don't always know how to explain it." Mark sat back in his chair, exhausted. After a moment he said, "Why are you doing this?" Evelyn didn't pretend to misunderstand. Mark's voice stayed low. "This isn't your responsibility," he said. "You don't have to protect my son. You don't have to step into this." The silence that followed felt longer than usual. Then Evelyn spoke. "Because I didn't protect him," she said. Mark's chest tightened. He didn't speak. Evelyn's voice stayed calm, but there was something underneath it now. Not drama, just truth. "I spent so long believing my work was more urgent than my life," she said. "And then I got the phone call." A small pause, and I realized I had protected everything except the person who mattered. Mark's throat burned. Evelyn continued, "So if I can help you keep your son safe, I'm going to." Mark stared at the table. He felt something shift inside him. Not gratitude exactly. Something heavier. Something like being seen. He swallowed. "You can't fix that by saving us," he said quietly. Evelyn didn't argue. "I know," she replied. That honesty hit him harder than reassurance would have. Mark exhaled. "Okay," he said. Evelyn's voice softened slightly. "Okay," she repeated. Lisa didn't file anything. Not yet. But she didn't stay quiet either. Mark began hearing about it from people he hadn't spoken to in years. A coworker made a casual comment about big news and laughed awkwardly. A neighbor asked if he was dating someone famous. Someone at the school pickup line looked at him too long. The world had shifted its gaze toward him. He hated it. One afternoon, his son came home from school quieter than usual. Mark noticed immediately. He waited until dinner was finished before asking. "You okay?" he said. His son shrugged. Mark kept his voice gentle. "Something happened." His son stared at his plate. Then he said, "Tommy said something." Mark's stomach tightened. "What did he say?" His son hesitated. "He said, 'Mom's sister says you're forgetting her.'" The sentence was small, but it hit like a punch. Mark felt his throat tighten. His hands froze on the edge of the table. For a moment he couldn't speak. Then he forced his voice to work. "Did Lisa say that?" he asked. His son nodded slightly. "She said grown-ups move on fast," his son whispered. "She said maybe you don't love Mom anymore." Mark's chest tightened so hard it hurt. He stared at his son's face. The child looked scared, not angry. Scared. Mark stood up quickly and walked around the table. He knelt beside his son's chair. He took his son's hands. His son's fingers were small and warm. Mark spoke slowly. "I will always love your mom," he said. His son's eyes filled slightly, but he didn't cry. Mark kept going. "That doesn't stop," he said. "Even if I talk to someone else. Even if I laugh again. Even if life changes." His son swallowed. But Lisa said, Mark's voice firmed slightly, but he didn't raise it. "Lisa is wrong," he said. His son looked down. Mark's throat tightened. He wanted to say more. He wanted to explain adult grief, adult loneliness, adult guilt. But his son didn't need a lecture. He needed safety. Mark lifted his son into his arms and held him close. His son clung to him immediately. Mark felt the child's small body shaking. Mark's own eyes burned. He held him tighter. "I'm here," Mark whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." His son's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "Do you miss her?" Mark's breath caught. "Yes," he said. He didn't soften it. "Yes, every day." His son's arms tightened around him. Mark stayed kneeling on the kitchen floor with his son in his arms until the shaking stopped. That night, after his son was asleep, Mark called Evelyn again. She answered. Mark didn't waste time. "She talked to him," Mark said. Evelyn's voice sharpened instantly. "Lisa?" "Yes," Mark replied. His voice was tight. "She told him I'm forgetting my wife." There was a pause. Mark could hear Evelyn breathing. Then Evelyn said, very quietly, "I'm coming over." Mark almost said no, but he didn't. "Okay," he said. When Evelyn arrived, Mark met her at the door. He looked exhausted. She could see it immediately. His shoulders were tight. His eyes looked darker. Evelyn stepped inside without hesitation. She didn't ask to sit. She just stood in the hallway and looked at him. "How is he?" she asked. "Asleep," Mark said. "But he cried." Evelyn nodded once. She took her coat off slowly. Then she said, "She crossed a line." Mark exhaled. "I know," he said. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "We're done being polite," she said. Mark's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't want to turn into someone who fights," he said. Evelyn looked at him carefully. "You already are fighting," she replied. "You're just doing it quietly." Mark stared at her. Evelyn's voice softened slightly. "You're fighting for him," she said. "And that's not ugly. That's love." Mark's throat tightened. He looked away. Evelyn stepped closer. "Mark," she said, "listen to me." He looked back. Evelyn's voice stayed calm but firm. "Your son will remember what you did next," she said. "Not what Lisa said." Mark swallowed. Evelyn continued, "And if you want to honor your wife, then you protect what she left in your hands." Mark stared at her. His breathing slowed. He nodded once. Then he said quietly, "I hate that this is happening." Evelyn nodded. "I do too," she said. There was a silence. Then Mark spoke again, his voice rough. "I didn't even want to love you," he admitted. The sentence came out like it had been trapped in him for weeks. Evelyn didn't react dramatically. She didn't smile. She just looked at him, eyes steady. "I know," she said. Mark's jaw tightened. "It just happened," he said. "In pieces." Evelyn nodded once. "It did," she agreed. Mark stared at her for a moment longer. Then he said, quieter, "I'm scared." Evelyn's voice softened. "So am I," she said. They stood there in the hallway, close enough to touch, not touching. Then Evelyn reached out and took his hand. This time, she didn't hesitate. Mark's fingers curled around hers immediately, like his body had been waiting for permission. Evelyn squeezed once. "I'm not leaving," she said. Mark's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to speak. Upstairs, the house remained quiet. His son slept. Outside, the world still talked, still watched, still judged. But in that hallway, holding her hand, Mark felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness. Not relief. Stability. The kind that didn't come from pretending nothing hurt. The kind that came from deciding not to run anymore. A few days later, Mark asked Lisa to meet him. Not at his house. Not at hers. A public cafe. Neutral ground. Evelyn offered to come. Mark said no, not because he didn't want her there. Because he needed to do one thing himself. Lisa arrived 10 minutes late. She sat down without apologizing. Mark didn't waste time. "You talked to my son," he said. Lisa's expression stayed calm. "I spoke to my nephew," she corrected. Mark's jaw tightened. "You poisoned him," Mark said. Lisa's eyes narrowed. "I warned him," she replied. "Someone has to." Mark leaned forward slightly. "His mother trusted me," he said. "And if you ever use her name to hurt him again, I will cut you out completely." Lisa's face tightened. "You can't," she said. Mark's voice stayed steady. "I can," he replied. Lisa stared at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Quieter now. She would be ashamed of you." Mark felt the words hit his chest. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He just said, "You don't get to speak for her." Lisa's mouth tightened. Mark stood up. He left cash on the table for his coffee. Then he walked out. His hands were shaking when he got to the car, but he didn't feel weak. He felt like he'd finally stepped into the life he'd been avoiding. That night, Mark came home and found Evelyn sitting on his porch steps. She hadn't called. She just sat there, coat on, hands folded in her lap, looking out at the street. When he approached, she stood up. "You're early," she said. Mark nodded. "I did it," he said. Evelyn studied his face. "You talked to her." Mark nodded again. "She won't stop," he admitted. "But she heard me." Evelyn's gaze stayed steady. "Good," she said. Mark exhaled. He looked tired. Then he said quietly, "I didn't fall apart." Evelyn's eyes softened slightly. "I knew you wouldn't," she said. Mark looked at her for a moment. Then he opened the door and let her inside. They didn't talk much after that. They sat in the living room, the lights low. Mark stared at the wall. Evelyn sat beside him. At some point, Mark reached into his wallet and pulled out the folded letter. He held it for a moment. Then he handed it to Evelyn. Evelyn looked at it like it was something sacred. "What is this?" she asked softly. Mark swallowed. "She wrote it before she died," he said. Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly on the paper. Mark's voice was quiet. "I've never let anyone read it." Evelyn looked at him. "Are you sure?" she asked. Mark nodded. Evelyn unfolded the letter carefully. Her eyes moved across the page. She didn't rush. Mark watched her face while she read. When she finished, she folded it back the same way and held it for a moment, as if she was making sure she didn't crease it wrong. Then she handed it back. Her eyes looked wet, but she didn't wipe them. She just said, "She loved you." Mark's throat tightened. He nodded once. Evelyn continued, voice steady. "And she trusted you," she said, "even with the parts of you you don't forgive." Mark looked down. His hand shook slightly. Evelyn's voice dropped. "You don't have to punish yourself forever," she said. Mark's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He stared at the letter in his hands like it was the only thing keeping him from collapsing. Evelyn sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Mark felt it. He didn't pull away. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Inside, the house was quiet. Not empty, just quiet. Mark leaned his head back against the couch and closed his eyes. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Mark said something he hadn't planned to say. "I think I want to live," he whispered. Evelyn's breath caught. She didn't answer right away. She just let the sentence sit. Then she said quietly, "Me too." Mark turned his head slightly toward her. Their eyes met. No promise was made. No future was mapped out, but something in the air shifted. A decision, quiet and real. Evelyn reached for his hand again. Mark let her. This time, he didn't feel like he was betraying anyone. He felt like he was finally honoring what his wife had left behind. Not the grief, the love, and the responsibility to keep going. He squeezed Evelyn's hand once. She squeezed back. Upstairs, his son stirred in his sleep and turned over. The sound was small, normal, alive. Mark listened to it like it was the most important thing in the world. Then he looked at Evelyn again, and for the first time since the hospital, since the funeral, since the months of numb routine, he didn't feel like he was waiting for permission anymore. He felt like he had already decided,